Good morning, everybody. So for those who don't know me, I'm Lee. I'm not the pastor. If this is your first time here, that's Rafer. So Rafer's out of town this week. It's funny because I was thinking about this, and like Rafer's always like, "Oh, I'm just the regular guy pastor." Like he's like intimidated by that word. So I'm like, if that's where he is, then what am I? I'm just like the regular guy who's here, I guess. And so I'm not super fancy. As I was kind of going into this, I'm just gonna be sharing today just a little bit about the story that kind of God's given me. And was anyone here in December when I talked? Okay, like 2 people. Sweet. So I'll give a little like recap as far as kind of what we talked about. But in general, I think God's really He's been teaching me a lot lately, and I'm just gonna basically be sharing a little bit of that. So I'm gonna try to take control of this, and we'll see if it works. Sweet. I think it's working. If you're here today, congratulations. I don't think this is an accident. I think that I fully believe that every moment we have was divinely created, divinely inspired. And the fact that you're here today and sitting in the row with the person or behind you or in front of you, that's something that God had planned this whole time. And so what I'm going to be talking today about is this concept of being stretched. And like, why does God stretch us? Because stretched, I think it inspires about as much excitement as like patience or discipline. Like no one really wants to talk about kind of the times where it's difficult for us and we're outside of our comfort zone and our boundaries are kind of getting pushed. So stretch is kind of what we're going to be focusing on today, and we're going to be looking at like Luke 6. So I think when I'm thinking about I don't know, literal examples of being stretched. Like, does anyone here do yoga? I don't, but I think something I find pretty interesting about yoga in general is that people do it really love it. Like when you are stretched, and I don't think anyone likes that feeling when they're being stretched, but everyone that enjoys it knows what it's like coming out the other side and kind of that relief that they feel. And as their boundaries keep getting pushed farther and they keep getting stronger and stuff like that. So most of the people I found like yoga are the ones who tried it and stuck with it just long enough to kind of get a feel for it. So that's kind of how we're going to be approaching this a little bit. So I think, so kind of for clarity, well, I think one thing that's kind of important to acknowledge is that God can do anything he wants. And so if he does something, it's got to be for a purpose, and there has to be kind of intent behind it. So I like to just take very simple things, a singular thing, and just kind of stare at it long enough until it starts to make sense. And I think that out of all the miracles that were talked about that Jesus did during his time on earth, there was one we're going to talk about today that it really kind of got my attention. And why is this mentioned? And if God chooses to stretch us, why doesn't he make it easy? Why doesn't he just like grant us with the strength? How is he being glorified in that? So I think if you want to think of it, so just throughout our discussion today, we're going to be kind of focusing it on like 2 aspects. So there's like the strain, the struggle, the pain, the discomfort. There's that side of it, and then there's also the praise part of it. And so I think both are really important, and both are happening simultaneously, even if you might not really notice. And so if you notice my sweet merch, my sweet swag shirt, it's like Hillsong, they were at Lubbock on Friday. Me and Sarah, we went, and Brooke and Christy, and it was a really good time. And I think one of the things that really got my attention is when you get that many people there, and they're all passionate about the songs, like raising your hands is such a, it can be a very uncomfortable thing, like the literal act of stretching, but it's almost universal, like across cultures and countries. You see it in kind of 2 different, like anytime your favorite team wins and people like jump up and they lift their hands and stuff like that, it's just that excitement, that joy that just can't be contained. And then you see it also in like little kids, like what do they do when they walk up to their parent? They just like stick their arms up, like pick me up. So it's like, I think those 2 parts of it I think are just so interesting, and the fact that why is that in us, and why is it so uncomfortable during worship or something like that when God might be calling us to get outside of our comfort zone. And is it, like for me personally, I probably didn't start doing it until a couple years ago because it just seemed weird. And I thought that, I almost felt like it was somebody fighting for attention, like they're just throwing their arms up because they want everyone to know that they're like holier than thou type thing. And so I'm like, I'm not going to put my arms up because I'm not going to be in that category of people. And so, but what really kind of took me to get outside of my comfort zone and really start growing in that area was how do I just close your eyes. Just make it between you and God. Just ignore everybody else there. If you have to go stand in the back of the room, in the corner, like whatever it takes. But there's something that your body language releases in your worship. And now I'm at the point where I find it hard to worship with my arms down. And so like this was something that I saw even just at the concert I just went to. And like it's a pretty vulnerable position. So there's kind of the social norms of like I don't want to be the one guy with my arms up. But there's also like the very literal vulnerability of like your ribs being like open for attack. And like one thing like my wife Sarah, she's the one in the back clicking the slides, but like she has this unique power where she loves to tickle, but she is immune to tickles. And I am extremely ticklish, and so like it's terrible because when you think about it, if anyone comes up and they go like tickle you, you're like your arms snap down, like 'cause you got to protect your ribs, and then like you might try to like counter tickle just enough to like break their attack so you can retreat and run away. And so like I think that so there's a very literal like vulnerability when you have your arms up, and I think that's something that isn't missed by us and just in our day-to-day lives. So one thing I noticed at this concert was, I mean, it was a pretty long concert. I think Hillsong United sung for like almost 2.5 hours. And I remember it's like worshiping, throw my arms up. And then my arms are tired. And I remember feeling like my arms are tired, I want to put them down. And then I remember having this kind of like little internal dialogue and this little debate, like, why do I want to put my arms down? Because my shoulders hurt. And it's like, why do my shoulders hurt? Maybe because I don't praise enough. Maybe because my arms aren't up enough. And so if you think about it, even from the context of, it's like any other muscle that you use all the time doesn't get tired in a minute and a half, like raising your arms. And I had this kind of like little joke in my head where like, what if we were like known as like the church with like the super swole shoulders because like our arms are like always up, and it's just kind of like something we do more than for like 2 songs on like a Sunday morning. And I just thought that was like it was almost kind of embarrassing. It's like, God, you created me to worship. And like, even in the Bible, it talks about what's going on in heaven, it's just continuous worship. And if that's what we're created to do, if we're created to spout praise from our very being, why is that a muscle I don't use? And so I thought that was kind of interesting. So just a little bit for those who weren't here last December when I talked. So my story, and I'll give you, I guess, me and Sarah's story. So we've been together since like 2007, so we've been together a long time. We've been married since 2012, and about a little over 5 years ago was when we started trying to have kids. And it was something that we waited a while, like just expecting it to happen. And then when we finally went to do it, we were running into issues, and we went to doctors. We were trying to figure out like what was it that was wrong, and why can't we have the kids that we want? And like, why is it so difficult when it's so easy for everybody else? And I think that was something that it was really hard to embrace that struggle when it's like, God, you put this desire in my heart and you give it to people who don't want it. Why can't we have that in our lives? And I remember and eventually got to the point where it was last fall, we decided to proceed with IVF, and it was like an all in, I don't want to hurt anymore. And I felt like God told me to do it, and he wanted that for us. And so we gave it all to him. It was like fasting. So for those not familiar, IVF, it's just where essentially it's like a month of like shots and hormone treatment type stuff to get like the one's body to produce like a ton of eggs. And then they essentially try to like fertilize them outside the body. And then once the embryo's ready, then they transfer it in and hope it sticks. And so it involves a lot of shots, a lot of appointments, and we were doing it in Lubbock, so there's a lot of driving. And I think one thing that was really that we committed to in the very beginning was, God, we only want to do this if you want us to do it. And we felt like he said, go ahead. So we're like, God, we're going to give all of it to you. And so every time before we had a shot, we like throw on a worship song, we're going to pray before we do it, and we're really going to give it to him. And we felt so good. And so there were parts of it that it was kind of a roller coaster up and down. But I know a lot of you here were even praying for us. And I remember just really walking in that confidence where I know God's good, I know God's going to do this. And we even found out that Sarah got pregnant, and we were so excited until we got the ultrasound and they couldn't find anything. And it turns out that it was an ectopic pregnancy where essentially embryo floated up into the fallopian tube, and it wasn't a viable pregnancy. So it was going to keep trying to grow at the risk of Sarah's life for internal bleeding and stuff like that if it ruptured. And it called for essentially a shot that chemically ends it. And that was so hard for us because it was like, God, we gave this all to you. how could you do this to us? And I remember just feeling just complete despair and like hopelessness, because I felt like I had set us up for failure. I failed as a husband because I kept telling her, no, God would never fail us like that. He wouldn't do that. So how could I expect anything but good things to happen? And when something not good happened, it kind of rocked me. And it kind of felt like, that's what I can describe as like if you're leaning on a wall like with all your strength and the wall just disappears and you just fall over. Like that's what it felt like emotionally. And I think that I was really seeking to, I remember praying, I was like, God, give me the words, help me put words to the lesson that you're trying to teach me in this season. And I think coming out of it, there was really only, I'll just show you, I wrote down so I wouldn't forget it, but if I let what I see dictate my praise, who do I make my God in the presence of He is unwaveringly good? My hope is by definition, meditation on His past, present, and future goodness. So I choose praise in pain, but it was the only thing pulling my heart closer to the one who can get me through it. And I think if you kind of break that down, even just quickly, is who am I letting dictate my praise? Who in my life, in what circumstances, what things that are not of God am I letting determine if I worship God or not? Because if God's character never changes, if God is perfectly good and God is perfectly, continually good forever, in the past, in the future, the God you're talking to right now is the God that's going to deliver you from that in the end, and He's there at the same time, how could I not have hope? And I think what it really came down to was the hope had to be rooted in His character and His goodness, and I had to get my eyes off of everything I could see, close them, whatever it took to focus on His character and who He was. And so that got me through it. But I think one thing that we found challenging was we kind of walled ourselves off. So we recently started another round of it, and what we found really hard was we had a hard time expecting good things to happen. Even after that lesson, I remember just praying, God, just have mercy on my inability to trust you right now, because I don't think that good things can happen right now, but you know who I am and I'm trying. Like it was so hard because we were just guarded our hearts because we had felt that loss afterwards, after the first time of trusting Him with everything. So it was almost like we're setting ourselves up, or we didn't want to set ourselves up for disappointment. But then if you think about it, if you truly comprehended who God was and how much He loved you, do you think that's how He'd want you to go through that trial or that circumstance? That He wants you to, just expect the worst so it won't hurt as much. No, He wants you to find comfort in Him, and He wants you to find security in what He can bring. And so I think I think when we started the second round, what made it so difficult was those thick guards, the walls, the stuff we had put up were just torn down, and we're having to experience it the same thing and trying to find that hope through it. And so, remember hearing it was a pastor who was talking about Luke 6 and when Jesus healed the man with the withered hand. And so, for some reason, it just rung out. I didn't know exactly what it meant, but it kind of it stayed with me. And I remember just trying to dig into it and why He asks him to stretch out his hand. And that's kind of the basis of everything we're talking about. So, because there's so many like seemingly impressive like miracles where like healing a guy with a crippled hand doesn't seem like that would be one of the few that's mentioned in the Bible. And so, I'm just going to go ahead and read through it. So in Luke 6:6-10, on another Sabbath he entered the synagogue and was teaching, and a man was there whose right hand was withered. And the scribes and the Pharisees watched him to see whether he would heal on the Sabbath, so that they might find a reason to accuse him. But he knew their thoughts, and he said to the man with the withered hand, "Come and stand here." And he rose and he stood there. And Jesus said to them, so the crowd, "I ask you, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to destroy it?" And after looking around at them all, he said to him, "Stretch out your hand." And he did so, and the hand was restored. But they were filled with fury and discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus. And so, even if we break it up in just a couple different things, so the first part, kind of the significance of the Sabbath. So the Sabbath, at the time there were tons of Jewish laws as far as things you couldn't do on the Sabbath, because that was a day that God said was you weren't supposed to work, essentially. So what the Pharisees were mad at this point was that if He's healing, He's working in some way. And at first it just seems kind of like, Jesus was kind of like punk rock, just like going in there, just like kicking down all the rules, like for just the sake of kicking down the rules. But I don't think it was necessarily that. I think one of the things that was really significant about this was they had, in good intentions, made laws, made restrictions to try to guide people down the path to get to God. Whereas Jesus comes and he's like, no, those paths or those man-made artificial things that you're creating to try to point me towards him, you're missing the whole point. The point of the Sabbath is during this day, I know you're going to get tired, you're going to lose focus, you're going to lose hope. I need you for one day a week to focus on me, to restore that relationship and that spiritual connection between him, because he knew that's where the healing came from. And so in this story where they're like, hey, you're working, how dare you, you're breaking the Sabbath, he's like, the whole point of the Sabbath is to relieve that burden on you because you need me, and on other people because your whole existence is to love God and love other people. So if you aren't using that time to help somebody, how could you call that being time dedicated to God? And so I think it was more of kind of getting back to the intent of just the unburdening and through that relationship. The other part, the withered hand. So I think I went through a lot of different translations, and I saw a deformed hand. Withered was the one that came up very consistently. And even kind of looking at just like the Hebrew word that talks about it, I think most scholars think it was probably some form of like paralysis. And this started like just shining brighter and brighter, like God was really trying to get my attention with this. Because if you think about it, what happened, like has anyone ever had a cast on their leg or something like that, and then they finally cut the cast off and you're like, oh God, like it's all like pale and like skinny and flabby and stuff like that. And so it's like what happens when you don't use something, it atrophies. So your body knows, hey, I don't need those nutrients there, I'm going to move them on to somewhere else. And so I think what most people think, it might have been like polio or something like that, where it was like nerve damage that prevented him from moving his hand, so the hand just atrophied. And I think anytime you see any sort of like deformity, whether you're cruel and you make fun of the person, or you're so compassionate you can't look at them because it hurts you because you know what they must be going through, it's uncomfortable. And I think deformities are uncomfortable, like our insufficiencies are uncomfortable. And so, but I think one of the things that was so powerful reading this was talking about the withered hand. Why did it die? Why did it decay? Because he didn't have control. He didn't have the ability to move it. And just seeing that parallel between that and our lives, when we try to do it ourselves and we don't have the power to be able to make anything happen or save our circumstances, we wither, we decay, we die, we slip further and further into failure, essentially. And like even the significance that they mention, it's his right hand, so that's like his working hand. Like if that's your dominant hand, how are you going to be successful? How are you going to get anything accomplished? And so I think there's almost like an embarrassment factor. And so I think this kind of comes into just the whole idea of being stretched. And anytime God's I almost know it's like God speaking to me at this point when it's something I don't want to do, or it's something like I'm uncomfortable. It's like, oh, that must be God, because that definitely wasn't my own thought. Like when he calls you to do something weird or say something nice to somebody, like that's when you should do it, because if it was coming from you, like you wouldn't be telling yourself to do that. So I think there's an embarrassment factor, because there's this whole crowd of people, and he says to that man, come up here and stand here. Like, let me draw attention to your insecurity. Let me bring you in front of everybody else and show them what you're incapable of and your deformity. And that, I mean, honestly, to that man at the point, if he didn't know Jesus, that's something that would feel cruel. Why would you call me out in front of everybody and draw attention, and they already make fun of me enough for what this is, and that I know I can't do it myself. But the difference is I think Jesus called him out, not for him. He was going to heal him. He could have healed him the next day. He could have healed him secretly in the crowd. But there was something significant that he was doing through that man's life, and that illness was given to him so that Jesus could prove this point. And so I think, this first part, withered hand, you can't control it, decays and dies, which I think is just an incredibly powerful metaphor for just our own ability to save ourselves. And so I think the next thing that's significant in this story is it talks about the stretch. So he says, stretch out your hand. If the guy's hand had completely withered away because he couldn't control it, how would he be able to stretch it? So it's almost back to this, why are you being so cruel to me? Why are you asking me and embarrassing me on something that you know I can't do? But he calls him to do it, and that's the difference. So Jesus turns to him and says, I want you to stretch out your hand. I want you to I want you to do something you were incapable of doing without me. And what happens when he does that? So it's not like he moves his hand for him. He calls to him, he asks him, he prods him, he pokes him, like, just do it. And when he does it, then what happens? Then it's restored. And it says it was just like the other. That life, that capability to go out and work now with his right hand, to go and do what God intended him to do the whole time, to go out and show people. I mean, how many people walking around like, I have 2 good hands. Isn't that impressive? And like, no one cares, and it's something that's not that significant unless you came from something. And that's why I think that's one thing that's so powerful about like that God's glorified in showing other people when he brings you from something. Because if you were there if you were never there in the first place, how would God show somebody else who needed to be healed, somebody else that needed to get through something, that he's capable of delivering them? There's no reason to follow him. And so like this whole idea of like him being glorified is because he needed people to see it. And some other translations even say he looked at like all of them in the eyes. Like can you imagine like if Jesus was standing there, just like eye contact, direct eye contact. Like how long did that take to get through everybody? Because it was that important where like, I need you to see this. Then he turned to him and said, stretch out your hand. And so I just want to encourage you guys today as far as like this concept of being stretched, because it's never comfortable. It's never being in the situation to start with or being called from the situation isn't where we want to be. We just want to be on that easy functioning part the whole time. And we don't want other people to see, we don't want to drop our walls and let other people see how inadequate we are in our own ability to do anything. And so, but that God might have a much greater purpose in that he's calling you to that thing that's uncomfortable, to that thing that you don't want to do, because he wants to be glorified and he wants to show other people his true character. So like the service isn't about us. And I think that's something that's so interesting, like that I've been even struggling with. So like I do the camera, I do the YouTube videos and stuff like that, but how do I keep my heart caged on what's important? Like when I come here and I'm just focused on, got to get the camera pointed right, got to make sure the mic's working, stuff like that, like I completely miss the point. And like if God came here, he was like, oh, good meeting you had, Lee. Like that was exciting. Like, but that I didn't actually invite his presence in, and my heart wasn't postured for worship and for love and compassion. When there's somebody that may have come, I don't know everyone in here's names. That's not okay. Like that's not okay for me to come here, say it's all about God, say it's all about serving him, when I'm missing the people he's bringing in the first place. And that's just, so I think one thing that's so important in any time we service or we serve God, anytime he calls us outside of our comfort zone, even anytime we sacrifice our own comfort for him as an offering, and we say, God, I want to be uncomfortable because I want you to carry me somewhere. I want you to do good through me. I want people to see who you are. Like that's when he moves. That's when people see who he is. That's like that, if you look like this electrical spark between people, that love right there, that's when people see God. And so embrace it because he's going to be, because people are going to see it. So one thing that I thought was really interesting on Friday during the concert is when they played songs that everybody knew, everybody stood up. You hear like 2 notes, like, I know this one, I'm going to stand up for this one. And then like, there's one part towards the end where they're like, hey, you guys want to hear some new songs? And they played 2 new songs. And as soon as it started playing, everybody sat down. And I remember just looking around, literally everybody, almost everybody, like it was sitting down. And I was just like, why? Are they standing for the people? Are they standing so other people can see them? Like, are they sitting down because they're uncomfortable? Because, out of my comfort zone, I don't know the lyrics to that song. I don't want to start singing too early when it's quiet and everyone will hear me. Like, it just kind of blew my mind. And I remember there was a song I'm going to play at the end of this where it started playing, one word in, and I was like, oh God. Like, I felt like Jesus poked me in the heart. It was just like, stand up. Like, it's worship time. And I turned to Sarah and I was like, we should stand up. And I like go to stand up, and then I look around and I'm like, no one is standing, and I sat back down, and I'm like, that was uncomfortable. Like, I don't want to be the one dude. Like, if you're in stadium seating and there's one person standing up, like, it's very obvious that that person is standing up. And I didn't want to be that. Like, it was just really uncomfortable. But the longer I sat there, it was like this burning feeling, like God's like, no, I need you to stand for me. And like, so took a deep breath, closed my eyes so I wouldn't be embarrassed. I stood up, lifted my hands, and I just started singing. And it was so powerful. And out of the whole time, I think that was one of the most powerful moments for me, because God was showing me that, like, I don't know what God was doing. Like God chose in that moment to stretch me, to put me outside of my comfort zone, and almost like in front of people so other people would see. I don't know what it was. I didn't talk to other people who saw me do that. I closed my eyes, got all awkward. But there might have been somebody in that concert that needed to see me standing up to give courage for something. And it wasn't about me. It was about somebody who may have been just like me, about stand up, nope, back down, and who saw me and that was powerful. Maybe he spoke to them on, hey, I need you to move next time when I ask you to do something. And so you never know what God's going to do through you when you have those moments of him kind of pushing you outside your comfort zone, stretching you into something. So, and kind of going back to the literal sense of raising your arms, that stretch of the physical putting you in that vulnerable and uncomfortable place is the literal thing that brings glory to God. And so I think that it should be those moments that we hunt for. And but of all the verses that say oh, take joy in trials and suffering and stuff like that, you're going to be blessed. And I've never been in a moment and really truly felt like I am so happy this is happening. I think the closest I've ever gotten in our recent story was me and Sarah were right there. It was soon after we found out that the IVF was not going well. And I remember I think God gave me the word sit. I couldn't have said it from my own heart, but it's like he told me, I'm putting you through this because you have me. I'm going to get you through it. You don't have to worry about that part. But I'm going to bring you, I'm going to bring somebody, so there's somebody out there that I love that I need to show them how much I love them. And if you don't have this story to share them, and by the way I'm getting you through it, how are they going to know how good I am? I need you with me by your side to get through this so you have a story to bring somebody else to me. And that was powerful. And we started going to the appointments of all the follow-up ones as we watched all the levels go back down as it was resolving itself. And I remember just sitting in that waiting room and looking at everybody else that was there, who they were there for the same reason. They're having that same pain, that same struggle. And instead of eyes down, why is this happening to me? Be everybody that God brings into that waiting room, I'm going to pray for. Because that's not an accident that we're there at the same time and they need it. They need it more than you need it because you have me, kind of thing. And that was the only thing that kind of gave me that strength to kind of get through it. Okay, so this is the song. The album got released on Friday, so if you haven't heard it, you're not alone. I think we're going to talk about a couple themes in it, and it came out Friday, so I'm not that prepared, but I just want to kind of share some of the things that really hit me with it. And there's this one verse, and it goes by real quick, it doesn't repeat it, that I want to read to you guys. So, from the gravest of all valleys come the pastures we call grace, a mighty river flowing upwards from a deep and empty grave. And I read this to you now because I want you guys to listen for it, and I want you guys to hear it, and I want you to notice when it comes after all these things. So there's a couple themes that kind of go along. We're talking about, even in that one, the mountains, the river, and graves. So this theme of the mountains is one of the first times it really hit me, because you always I remember even on our first cycle of IVF where I'm like, God, give me a story that I can shout from the mountaintops so that you know how good I am. And then it happened. I'm like, why, God? I wanted to be there to glorify you. Why wouldn't you put me there? And I remember, so it's this mountains is almost like this end state, you're just standing up on top and everything's easy. Done. It's thanks, God. Got it from here. I'm just going to chill. I'm complete, which I don't think we're ever going to get to the top of a mountain. I think we'll have resting points along the way, but if we get to the top, we're Jesus, and if we get to the top, there's nowhere else to go. And how are we going to keep growing? And how are we going to keep helping people? And how are we going to keep praising God? And so I think that, so this theme of the mountains where it's we always hear about it spoken as I'm either a mountain or I'm in the valley. The valley is the place you don't want to be. The mountain, that's a pretty sweet spot. Enjoy that. But it talks about the mountain's an obstacle when you're not on top of it. But you have to go up that mountain to get on top of it. And it really shifted my thinking in all that we do. If we start seeing the obstacles as that literal source of where that end state's going to be and how we're going to get to where God needs us to be so other people can see us. Like if we're climbing up a mountain and we have walls up, we're like, no one else is going to know what I'm going through, and people who are like tired, like taking a break under a tree and looking up the mountain, and they can't see you higher than them, knowing that it goes higher and that it gets better. How are they ever going to find encouragement to keep going on? And so like when you start seeing mountains from that perspective of the mountain's not changing. If you're on top of it or you're at the bottom of it, the mountain's still the mountain. And God, he never changes, and his plan is, I think, he has his plan for all of it, but it's a perspective change, and it's learning to kind of embrace it as you're going through it and to praise him regardless of what's happening just because of his character. So last week was Easter, and even in that, like King of My Heart, that song gets me every time. Just saying, God, you're good. You're just so good over and over and over and over is just so powerful. And you think good, like it's not a fancy word. It's a word that's everybody understands. And just singing that. And one of the parts where it talks about like conquering the grave, conquering the grave, like essentially saying like death, nope, you're done. You had your turn. Like that's never really kind of hit home with me, because who knows anybody that's raised from the dead? Who knows anyone that's actually been crucified? Like, how could we ever really appreciate what that means? And I think one thing was really interesting for me, even last week, was I think God really showed me where me and Sarah have a little bit of that. And it felt like death had its grip on Sarah's womb, and it was snuffing out all the life that was passing through it. And I remember just that feeling of like, there's nothing more I can do. I can't do it. I'm giving it to you, God, and you're not doing it. How are we supposed to make it anywhere from here? And like, I remember last week, I remember just this feeling of like God being like, it was like God was saying to me, death, your turn's over. It's mine now. And just think that all that time where he'd been waiting and he'd been hurting along with us, and he's like, no, it's my time now. What's the verse say? Same side. Like you gotta do same side, same arm and leg at the same time. But it was just taking it back into the glory and into what he had planned for this whole time. And I remember it was to the song, King of My Heart, we're singing it. And I remember I had my arm up, I was holding Sarah's hand, and I remember him like telling me, put your hand on her stomach. And I was like, no, that's really weird. Like what is that? Like that's so weird, and someone's gonna see me and it's gonna be embarrassing. And I remember, but it's like anytime, like I said, you hear those little voices, it's weird, I'm not gonna do that. You better do it. And I put my hand on her stomach and I praised and just giving that to him, and like God, and just as we're saying, God, you're so good. You're so good. And like it was powerful. And I think while God may stretch you and while God may take you through moments where you're out of your comfort zone, where he asks you to serve somewhere that you don't want to, where he gives you a dream that you don't think you can handle, when he draws attention to you in your weakest point, he's doing that for a reason, because he wants to be glorified. And if you could just hold on to that God that you're talking to in your worst moment is present in that future he's going to deliver you to. He sees it. He's already done it. You're going to be there, but you got to wait for his timing. And so with that, I'd like to announce Sarah Tuesday is 6 weeks pregnant. Yeah. So I just want to encourage you guys, just stretch for his glory. Like when you have an opportunity to get outside your comfort zone, to really go to something that you don't think you're ready to do, just step up. Just, God, give me the strength to do it. Because you're probably going to be in those points where you don't feel like you can. And you're not going to feel more like you can, because if you felt like it defeats the whole point of God wanting you to be faithful and stepping into that. And so I just as we play this song, I just want you to think about it a little bit. Just think about like where in my hope, or where in your life do you feel like you need more hope? What part have you kind of given up on that you haven't expected things to get better? What hurt have you held on to? Like And then where do you think God wants you to stretch in that? How do you think God might want to use that? And if you don't know, it's okay. Just keep giving it to him, and he's going to do what he wants to do with it in the first place. So that was all I had. I'm going to start this. But before we play it, I want to pray with you guys real quick. God, we thank you. We thank you for the stretch, God. We thank you for the strain. We thank you for the pain that you're going to deliver us through so that you can be glorified. God, we are incapable of doing it ourselves until you call on us to move. When you call on us to do it, God, that's when the healing, that's when the restoration comes, and that's what sets the example for others to know how good you are, and we thank you, God, for that. God, we thank you for where you've put us so that we can truly bring you glory through our pain and our struggle, God. God, we pray for everybody that's going to see our story. God, everyone that needs to hear how you moved in our lives and what you delivered us from. God, we just prep their hearts to be receptive when you bring them into our lives. God, we give it all to you. We give all the burden. We can't do it ourselves. We love you, God. In your name we pray. Amen.